bit before Sam, and we want to welcome Camille Yarborough, who's going to talk about culture and gentrification in Harlem. But Edwin Vega, who's an attorney from the Legal Aid Society, the Community Law Office.
Yes, all right. My name is Edwin Vega from the Legal Aid Society. I've been practicing. I've been practicing for about 20 years. I represent tenant associations in Harlem and Washington Heights. And I have been, I think, on the front lines of the war against poverty, because housing is a class issue, as was mentioned. By the way, this is a great housing panel. There's not much I can add. This has been very enlightening. But I would like to give you a snapshot of the day-to-day war against gentrification. It goes not block by block, but I think building by building. Harlem is, of course, a prime victim of gentrification. I think it's a very, very complex issue. I'll give you an example. Housing Development Fund Corporation, for low-income people. It comes out of the TIL program, tenant term lease program. The city wanted to give tenants an opportunity to purchase their apartments for $250. If the tenant association could show that they could manage the building and keep it, above, keep it profitable, or at least maintain it, then they would have this opportunity to purchase their apartments. These would be co-ops, and the co-ops, of course, have board of directors. Shareholders vote who's on the board. So now what we're seeing are what I'd like to call runaway boards. I'll give you an example. Not too far away from here, a board has decided to commence eviction proceedings against 10 families. Why? Because they're alleging that it's an eviction plan, and once the lease is up, they can evict. Now these of course are the HDFC. The theory behind this is to keep affordable housing in the community. So what these boards are doing is they're trying to evict low-income tenants and then sell the apartments for $75,000, even $100,000, in contravention of the spirit and indeed the letter of the law. So what we have, these 10 families, they commenced holdover proceedings in housing court. We were forced to start a Supreme Court action to stop the board from continuing to evict these families. We were successful in getting a stay, but it doesn't look good. And our argument was that, look, if you evict 10 families, 10 low-income families, the board can sell these apartments for perhaps $100,000. That's $1 million. And these apartments will go not to low-income people from the community, but to others who are coming in. The point is, you're taking away low-income housing from the community. We were successful in staying the proceeding. It's in the Supreme Court right now. We're not sure that we can win. The city's position was basically this, and this, I think, is a dirty little secret in our community. My clients are on welfare. Some of them are dysfunctional. Many, all of them, women with children. They have the right to stay in this community. They have every right to keep their apartments. You have boards who say, no, they're dysfunctional, they don't pay their rent on time, they're a problem, we don't want them. And I think it's wrong. These boards have to be controlled. These apartments are for low-income people. They're not for middle-class people or high-middle-class people. Now this is the problem we have. Is it really gentrification if people of color who are middle class or high middle class come back to their community and purchase apartments or want to live in Harlem or East Harlem? I'm just presenting the question. I don't have an answer. And in coming in and purchasing these apartments, are they not contributing to gentrification? Now, I was born in the South Bronx. And I maintain that I have every right to go back to the South Bronx and live there. And perhaps, maybe, buy a co-op or rent an apartment that, is $1,500 a month, not that I can afford it.
But these are issues that they're very complex issues. My point, or at least the Legal Aid Society's position, is that these apartments are for low-income people, and so what if people are wealthy? So it's a very emotional, very tough issue, because anyone in my building anyway, in this situation, we're all people of color, we're all from the same neighborhood, we've been here 20, 30 years, and yet you have one part of the building saying, no, you have to go. And I think it's a class issue, and we have to be very aware that we have to maintain affordable housing for people, even if they're, listen, they're women with children, and they're on welfare. It does not make them pariahs. They should not be evicted. And if middle class people don't want to live next to people on welfare, well, tough. And we have to continue to make sure that those who cannot protect themselves can remain in this community. Now, something else I wanted to mention. DHCR. DHCR is the worst. They are so anti-tenant. It's just incredible. It was mentioned before. I think one of the how do you fight against gentrification? One of the things is to keep rents down. So people, you got to fight for every nickel increase. I mean, you have to fight to keep your rents as low as possible. MCI increases, major capital improvements. The state, the HCR, permits the owner to do some lousy work and then submit an application seeking permission to increase the rents. And there was a building in Washington Heights where the rents were, it was like $15 to $20 per room. And people simply cannot afford MCI increases. Yes, we want to live in habitable apartments. Yes, we want new gas lines, perhaps pointing. But I think landlords are milking the system. They are doing shoddy work and then submitting these applications for permission to increase the rents, and people simply cannot afford it. I'll give you an example. In Washington Heights, the rents went up by $200 a month. Now, it is true that these rents are phased in. You can't, you have to pay a maximum of 6% over a long period of time. But they're permanent increases, and I think it's landlords are using this MCI to increase the rents and make it less affordable for the tenants to live there, especially senior citizens. I represented the DeBar. How many of you know the DeBar?
Yeah.
The DeBar is I think a great example of a big time owner, Joe Wiener, right? He comes in, he has all this money, buys up all this property in the Bronx and Manhattan, pays a lot of money. Well, how do you think he's going to pay his debts? He has to increase the rents, and he will do anything to do it. He'll start holdover proceedings, alleging that the senior citizen perhaps has pets. He'll start nuisance holdovers, saying that the family makes too much noise, all sorts of things. He'll drag people into court for any reason, hoping that they'll be so intimidated that they'll leave. So that's why it's important that tenants form associations where they can educate themselves with respect to defenses in court, such as warranty of habitability, rent overcharge, harassment. You can go to trial if you have a lot of problems in the apartments, and you can try and get an abatement, which is a reduction. It's a credit towards your rent. But the other issue, and very quickly, demolition. I have a case downtown in the Village where the landlord purchased the building, right? He just purchased it and then submits an application to DHCR to demolish the building. Now, and DHCR will let him. What he has to do is simply come up with a finance plan and submit an architect's, plan to build a new building. Now, the protections afforded the tenants who are already there are, well, he has to pay them off or find comparable housing. But to me, what is astounding is that there's nothing wrong with this building. It has very few violations. Yet, DHCR will allow the owner to demolish it if he meets certain obligations. But to me, it's another example of how the system is set up so that affordable apartments are taken out of the market and made into, luxury apartments. So that's it.
Preferential rents.
Preferential rents. Yes, a landlord can. If your rent's $1,000, the landlord can say, "Okay, you'll get tenant. I'll let you in for $800," and he'll write it on the lease, preferential rent. Now, unfortunately, there's a law, last year or 2 years ago, that said that a landlord could decide after the expiration of the lease to get rid of the preferential rent. So now you got to pay the legal registered rent. It's out, and there's some controversy here. It's our view that the preferential rent is part of the lease, and that you have to renew a lease on the same terms and conditions as the prior lease. So in our view, the landlord cannot just unilaterally get rid of the preferential rent. DHCR, that's supported by case law. There's some other judges who disagree. It's an issue that's very controversial. But in our view, we tell our clients that they should fight this. If the landlord suddenly says, "No, you got to pay me $200 more because that's the legal registered rent," my argument would be, no, you gave me a lease, you have to renew it on the same terms and conditions, and any increases have to be based on the preferential rent. But it's very controversial. I don't know if anyone on the panel has anything to add.
We said Collingwood. Remember Collingwood?
Yes.
Back in 497, which essentially said if they charged us less, it stayed at that level
Yes.
until the next tenant came in.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
Just go back to that.
Uh-huh.
And the last thing, hall room negotiations in landlord-tenant court. Tenants sign the stipulations that they cannot live up to. And how would you educate, what would you tell tenants about that and to be careful of? And also landlords writing in legal fees as part of the money that's owed without it being approved.
All right, when you go to court, as you know, a lot of tenants go to court, they don't have representation, they're not entitled to representation, although I disagree that housing is such an important human right, as was mentioned before. Housing court for a tenant is a nightmare. It's as simple as that. Usually you're taken to court because you don't pay, they're alleging you don't pay rent, you're served with a petition, you go to court, and usually what happens is many tenants are approached by the landlord's attorney, and the attorney will say, "Well, you owe this amount of money, how much time will it take for you to pay it? And give me a judgment." That's it. So a tenant who doesn't know, okay, you're right, I owe the money, and I'll sign the stipulation, and all of a sudden there's a stipulation, an agreement that says that the tenant must pay X amount of monies by a certain date. A judgment is given. That's a final order. And if he doesn't pay by that date, then the landlord has the right to get a marshal to serve him with eviction papers. And of course, that might lead to an eviction. Well, what's wrong with that picture? First of all, you should always, when the landlord takes you to court, always challenge the rent. First thing you should do is go to the state building, DHCR, and get a copy of the rent history of the apartment. There might be a rent overcharge. There might be a claim for a rent overcharge. That is that the landlord has been charging you the illegal rent for a certain amount of time. Also, DHCR has an administrative procedure. You can commence a proceeding with DHCR for rent overcharge. Second, if you have any violation or condition you think is a violation in your apartment, you have to bring that up. You have to tell the judge, "Hey, I'm not paying the full rent because I got all these violations in my apartment. I got mice running around, I got leaks, I haven't had a paint job for 3 years, and you are entitled to some sort to an abatement." Judgments. I would never give a judgment. A judgment it gives the landlord the right to not go back to you and say, "Hey, where's the money?" but to go directly to the marshal. I wouldn't give the landlord a judgment. Just say, "Look, I'm paying the money, so whatever I owe within 30 days, that's it. You have to make a motion to get me back into court and we'll either, come to another agreement or we'll talk to the judge. So many tenants do not understand their rights, although supposedly when you sign a STIP, the court attorney will read it to you, or the judge, if he's a good judge, will also read it to you and ask you, do you understand what you're signing? Many times they do, other times they don't. There are cases, these are the nightmare cases, where a tenant is, you owe $10,000, when are you going to pay it? Oh, I can't pay it. Well, when are you going to move out? And the tenant is so scared and intimidated that they agree to move out. Well, there are resources that, I've done eviction prevention also for many years. If you have a family and you owe $5,000 for whatever reason, you can always we approached or lobby with the Department of Social Services to get monies to satisfy any judgments. If you're single, there are also resources that you can tap into whereby they can help you pay arrears. I was in court the other day where the woman was saying, look, I don't have $5,000. And so she signed a STIP saying that she would move out. And the judge, to her credit, said, well, have you approached legal aid? Have you approached the Department of Social Services? Perhaps they can pay some of this. Perhaps they can help you. And she adjourned the case, to her credit. She adjourned the case so that the tenant could try to get help from the various social agencies. So even if you owe a lot of money, there are ways we can lobby to help you get, satisfy the arrears, especially for senior citizens. The rents are just skyrocketing. And we see that, many people just get SSI or, Social Security. They're paying well over 50% of their income goes to rent. And, at least in the DeBar, people, just tremble with fear. You can imagine living in an apartment for 40 years and all of a sudden you're faced with the reality of having to move out or be without an apartment. There are special programs which, may not completely resolve the problem. Senior citizens rent income exemption, the SCREET program. There's also the DRE program, which is a disability rent income exemption. Those programs will pay anything above a certain amount of rent. So your rent is frozen. Now it may not, it does soften the blow of paying a lot of rent, but it doesn't reduce the rent. So, questions? I'm all over the place here.
Thank you.
Okay, Camille, could you share your Camille Yarborough?
I hope I can I be heard? Can you hear me? A little bit? Okay. Good afternoon, family. How are you? Hope you're doing well. At last, summertime is here. We think. I think one decision we can make right away is to stop calling what's happening to us gentrification. It's a form of terror. The man who was here a minute ago described how citizens, tenants are forced to go to this department, to that department, all around it, and really afraid, moving in terror. They're going to be put out of their apartments. And so we have to think about it again. What is it? And we have to understand that what's happening here in Harlem is happening all over America to black people of African ancestry. Do you understand that? Do you see that? I was born and raised in Chicago. It's happening there. It's happening in Los Angeles. It's happening in Atlanta. It's happening in Africa. It's happening in Europe to people of African ancestry. So what are we talking about, really? We're talking about oppression, a new form of colonization, if you will. And so we have to think about it. What we're talking about now are symptoms of a system of oppression. And so if we think of it on that grand scale, we have to then refocus where our attention goes. Not running around in the courthouses. That's only a part of it. But who's the cause of it? Who's behind it? Who makes the decisions to take Harlem back? Decision that was made years ago to come back and take this. For a while I was teaching at City College and the course was the Harlem community. And I had to start down at the waterfront, where they have the restaurants down there now. That's where the ships would come in, because New York City was one of the biggest slave trading states in this country. It made its wealth off of cotton. You understand that people from the South, our people, created and sent up here. And so the very foundation of New York City rests on the labor of people of African ancestry. So let us look at it again. I'm going to jump again. Several years ago, you come into Harlem and you see on 120th Street, 5th Street vendors from 5th Avenue, even further, all the way over to 8th Avenue. People from the Caribbean, African American people, people from Africa, all the people of culture selling what they created with their hands. You go to the Caribbean, I went on a cruise, and you know how those cruises stop at different islands and every place. When you get off, you see people of African ancestry selling things. What are they selling? Products from China, products from India. The most creative people in the world, in the Caribbean and here, are not even selling their own creations. Who is in charge of that? Those same people who are in charge of taking us out of Harlem right now are taking our work away from us around the world. Why is it that you look on television and see bankers proud of the fact that they're putting all of these people in China to work? You mean African people in America can't do that work? They're sending it to India. African people in New York can't do that work? If we were doing that work, we would have money to pay these exorbitant rents that are coming up here, although we shouldn't be paying them. It's a process of putting us out. Where are we going now? We started downtown. That part of the used to be Little Italy, Little China now, whatever it is. Then we pushed up into an area called the Tenderloin, then the second Tenderloin, and then around where Lincoln Center is. Then we were pushed out of that and pushed up here to this area, which was really started to be built up for European Americans, but they didn't come. And so the money, the business would put into the hands of some black real estate people who then tripled the rents. And because we were so desperate, we moved here, paying all kinds of rents, which we could hardly afford then and which we cannot afford right now. And so it's been a process of pushing us and pushing us. Where are we going? Already they've separated Harlem. Now they're calling it what? What? That's right. Somebody, Heights. Hamilton Heights. They're separating Harlem right now. It's just like when we have wars around the world. We had war in Korea, now we got North Korea and South Korea. War in Vietnam, now we got North Vietnam, South Vietnam. Now we come up into Harlem, now we got Hamilton Heights, and we got a little piece of thing called Harlem. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? And what do? They use our culture. As I said, the culture was across 125th Street. Our people were selling. I could find beautiful things, imported from Africa, imported from everywhere, from the Caribbean. It's gone. Now you find trash. Even you go to Ghana, and the kente is made in, from Chinese factories. I'm saying, people, that we have to look to who's in charge. When LIB was at the Apollo, people from the street would come in. They'd have all kinds. In Hotep, Gary Bird had his program on. People from everywhere would come in and talking. It was cultural. It was family. But it was too powerful for those people we call politicians who take an oath to the city and to the state. Do they take an oath to us? I don't think so. And so that had to go. 125th Street now, the people, the culture of the people is gone, and the corporations are there. And that is what is happening. Big time people with big time money are moving us out, and I'm asking you, where are you going? They took away a lot of our culture, but they use our artists to diminish. First, they criminalize you, as Dr. Shashi McIntyre says, they're criminalizing a race. Look at our prisons full of our people, young men. Why are they, are we born genetically inclined to crime? I don't think so. Why? How come so many of us are in prison right now? More and more women are going to prison right now. People who are creative. A lot of our most creative people are in prison right now. And so we in the community have to do something else. We have to, after they criminalize you, before they criminalize you, they trivialize you. They make our culture less than it is. We who have taught the world how to sing, how to dance, how to style, how to have attitude, how to be on the stage, are now imitating people who don't know what they're doing. Before I came over here, I'm looking at television and there was a promo for a dance, exercise. It's called dance hip-hop. Every movement is from African dance. You go to these different, on Broadway, they don't say it, but what they're dancing is African dance, and they mix it all up and put a little stuff in there and they call it something else. But our culture is being repackaged, sold to us with no soul. No soul. And they're making a lot of money and we're buying it. What's happening to our churches right now? That was the power base for the movement in the South. And the system that runs things knows that, and so they went to the culture of the church. And they say they're going to be faith-based now. You're going to do what we say do. Now you listen to the music and it's big orchestrations. It's sisters out there with gowns on. You think they were in a nightclub someplace. It's like showtime. Where's the soul? Where are those songs that really talk about gentrification? Where are the songs that talk about what elders experience? Where are the songs talking about the shock that you see when you see our young brothers walking down the street with their pants hanging down below their behinds? And you say, old people just don't like young people. That's not true. Our young people didn't used to act the way they're acting now. Because they've been decultured. And it's through the artists that they've been using to deculture our people. To trivialize our culture. And you say you're thinking about where you're going to live. That's part of the deculturalization of our people. Before we would help each other in the building. We knew each other in the building. We knew each other in the block. If something happened, we were there to help each other. And then I remember at one point, one of the teachers up at City College was put out of his apartment. The people took the stuff right back, put it back in. And then they put it back in. Because we had a unity there. That's based on culture. That's based on how we share our food when we're hungry. You know that one pot thing? Well, it takes, as I say, it takes a village to raise a child. But the village has to be healthy. The village has to know who they are and respect who they are. And we do that through the way we talk, our culture. Culture is not just singing and dancing. It's how we say good morning. Or if we say good morning. It's how we relate to one another. And until we get our souls back, we're not going to get our neighborhoods back. Until we get those back, they're going to push us wherever they want to. And we have to be right up front. It's not about gentrification. With us, it's about race and class and power. And if we cannot stand up as a race of people, as all others do, don't be afraid to say, ain't no such thing as race. Well, somebody made it. Somebody did it. We didn't design this whole thing about race. But it's there, and we have to be able to say it and say it with conviction. This is still a racist society. This is still a racist world. And we as people of African ancestry have to be able to stand up and say, yes, we're African. Now we're scared to say we're African. Well, what are we? Those other people know we're African. No matter how much we straighten our hair and blonde our hair, we're still African. And they know it. And that's where the power is, and that's why Europe is all over Africa. They're taking it. Where are you going when you don't have a home to go to? We have to make a stand. We have to make a stand. First, we have to, not first, but simultaneously, we have to reclaim our young people who are out here, and we're turning away from them because we're scared of them. We cannot do that. We cannot. They are our children, and those people who want to oppress us and who are oppressing us, if they come to get me in the morning, who they come to get at night? You understand? And our family is a family if one is taken. we're taken. So we cannot let that happen anymore. On my neighborhood, 114th Street up there around St. Nick's, every summer these young children come from a basketball game, which they put up. Now they won't put up a school to teach them anything about their culture, but they put up another basketball game. Who was it? It was this famous Roman tyrant. He was really awful. But when they were oppressing people too much, he said, give them games. Sound familiar? Look at TV, what do you see on television? Games. Our minds are taken in these other things. We're talking about stuff that has nothing to do with us. On 114th Street, every summer, these young men and women, young sisters and brothers, who are coming from these basketball games, the police channel them through the street with the sirens going. Then they go down 116th Street, then they come back, and the young people are making it a game. See, so they go up this way and they come down that way, and they go, and the police, soon somebody's going to get shot. Because the young people have this, this energy, and we're not directing them. Why isn't some of us supplying a place for those young people to go every summer? The church is up there. Ooh, I'm sorry. Remember the young lords and those kids, how they took over the churches? Thank you. I'm saying that we have to find space for those young people. It's our responsibility. It's not theirs. If we have a future, it's in our young, but we have to train them, don't we? We have to train them up the right way. And this is what we're not doing, and it's happening through culture. I'm a performing artist. Our artists are being used to destroy our people. Not all of them, but enough of them. Those you see on television, most of the time, do not come on with anything that's positive. Do not come on with images that are positive, nor with words. And we accept it. Do you write letters? Do you call? Feel your power, people. We changed this world around. Do you understand where we were before? Remember? Before the movement? We were not on Wall Street. They didn't have all these corporate black people. We were not even hardly in Woolworths on 125th Street before they closed that place down and those other places. But we had to struggle. You got to struggle again. And you have to struggle where the power is. They'll keep you running around in these courts, and then you'll give up because you get tired. Or you get old and die. We have to go. Sister Nellie knows who's in charge. These people up here know who is in charge. You know who's in charge, but you have to really take the courage to get them. I'm sick and tired of politicians who stand up and go around and taking awards and posturing and carrying on and haven't done a damn thing but hold the space. They've held Harlem until it was time for the takeover. That's all they have done, people. So what are you going to do? We know that. So what are you going to do? Stand up for yourself. Stand up for your ancestors. Stand up for every great thing that we have done in this country and in this world. Stand up, put your hand on your hip, let your backbone slip and say, I'm African and I'm proud of it, and you're not going to do one more thing like that to me. Organize and find what you can do to stop this takeover. And it has to happen here. It's happening in Chicago. People are fighting back. The Africans are fighting back in Europe. We have to do it because they want to take. And as Lorraine Hansberry said, they want to take and take and take until they kill the goose that laid the golden egg. I'm not going to die. We don't need to die. We need to kick some butt. And stand up, black people. Stand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Camille. Our last, Camille Yarborough. Our last presenter is Brother Sam Anderson, who's going to close this panel out.
Sam, could you just give us a second while we change the tape, please?
Yeah. There's one of these being passed around in the audience, I think, unless somebody walked out with it. Anybody? Okay.
Somebody walked out with our supply.
But that's all right. It's a petition.
Not a very nice
It's a petition that people should sign dealing with what Sister Camille Yarborough was mentioning. Yeah.
Just a few minutes.
Yeah.
Remember, the names are on the program. So you don't need to, if the names are on the program.
No, she asked about.
So just check
Yeah.
out this
Yeah,
lady
she
here
was-
was talking
right.
about.
Hi, Kamosi.
See Brother Kamosi's in the audience. Good morning and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As I was saying, the petition for a campaign to teach black history in New York City public schools is going around. It's the law, but it's not being implemented, okay? And so this petition is around. I'd like to cover, on our way to discussing this unified movement, I'd like to just cover some history first, which Camille Yarborough had mentioned, and to re-emphasize that history, and also talk about education and gentrification, and then get into the importance of a unified front to fight against gentrification. Camille Yarborough mentioned about the history of black people in New York City. And I could condense it down to very simple. The history of the development of capitalism, one aspect of the history of the development of capitalism in New York City has been the history of the dispersal of black people. From the 1600s, when the Dutch occupied Manhattan Island after they bum rushed the Native Americans, the free blacks, the handful of free blacks had land. That land, some of it is where Cooper Union is. Some of it is, we know where SOBs is on Varick and Houston. That was black folks' land. That was African people's land. When the British came in, they re-enslaved the free blacks and took their land, forcing many of the black people to move into 5 Points area of New York City, which is over where the courthouses are, near the African burial ground region. That became more developed as the city developed. Black people were forced into what we call Greenwich Village until the mid-1800s or so. And then they were forced out of Greenwich Village to make room for the gentrified white folks. They forced them up into what is called Hell's Kitchen and Seneca Village, which was part of where Central Park was being built. When Central Park was being built, they forced black people out of Seneca Village. And we were moved into further into Hell's Kitchen and bits and pieces into Harlem. Other black folk went into the Bronx and into Brooklyn. There's a lot of history of dispersal of black people as capitalism developed an urban center called New York City. So that when what we are witnessing today, 2007, in Harlem, is our last stand. Our last stand. Our last stand in Bed-Stuy, our last stand in Fort Greene, our last stand in the South Bronx, our last stand in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, St. Albans, South Ozone Park, our last stand. It is our last stand because if we do not fight back at those regions where we are, we will be completely removed out of New York City. Another little bit of history to understand the centrality of capitalism and slavery in New York City is that New York City was the largest slave port in the Western Hemisphere outside of Brazil, all the way up until 1865. It was also the largest sugar refinery center in North America, Bushwick. Okay? The largest, that's why Domino Sugar used to be over there for years. Largest sugar refinery. It also was the manufacturer of Confederate dollars. This is where Confederate dollars were produced, in New York City. Okay? So New York City, even though it ended the enslavement of African people through a trick bag law in 1827, it was still involved in the enslavement of African people directly through being the finance capital and the sugar refining capital of the United States. The trick bag law in 1827 said, you are free, black folk, unless your African woman produces a male child. And if that male child is born and survives to 21, then that male child is free. So, this is a little bit of history that we need to know and need to contextualize our movement, our forces that are being dealt with now. This is not being taught in public schools in New York City because our children need to be dumb, need to be ignorant of themselves and of the world in order for oppression to continue, in order for gentrification to develop in the way it's developing. And the way it's developing, about 40 years ago, come 1968, there was a struggle against Columbia University led by young black people. Against Columbia University's gentrification movement 40 years ago. Okay, into Harlem, the encroachment. And I guess you heard some of that last night when you heard from Brother Bill Sales, because he was one of the key leaders in that movement. 40 years ago. And that battle is still going on. Okay? That battle is still going on. We have, in 30 years ago, Brother Bill Sales, myself, the late Brother Bill Epton, and a host of others formed Black New York Action Committee. One of the reasons why we formed that group was because we wanted to fight gentrification in Harlem. And people thought we were insane when we said that gentrification will start in areas like 110th Street and other areas up Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, because those were beautiful homes, dwellings, and so forth that white folk want back. They say you're crazy. Well, we know we're not crazy. You know, we know what the deal is today. So there's a lot of history in terms of the struggle against gentrification, and a lot of people have fought this struggle against gentrification. I think we are losing the battle because of the dumbing down of our generation, our younger generation, compliments of New York City public education or public miseducation. And one of the things that has happened, one of the tolls that has been taking place in Manhattan is that, and you probably don't know this, but this is public now. Last year, white babies outnumbered, newborn white babies outnumbered black and Latino babies in Manhattan by 30%.
Whoa.
Okay? You understand what that means in terms of public education? You have a critical mass of petty bourgeois white families now either on the edges of the public school education system or directly involved in it, as one of the public school teachers say, in lifeboat schools. These little pockets of charter schools in Lower East Side and the Upper West Side. You know, they got their little enclave. But as more is going to happen, because you have now a significant number of white babies being born to white middle-class families in Manhattan. And that means a fundamental transformation of the public school system in their favor, because they have the power and you don't, because you're not involved in the public school system. Understand that. What will happen, what is happening, is that our children enter public schools that are pre-prisons. Their children enter public schools that are pre-college. Understand that. Our children today, 2007, have a dropout rate in junior high school to the extent that if we trace a child from kindergarten to high school, it's a 1 in 100 chance that that black male child will graduate from college. Okay? So we're in the midst of the gentrification process. Is not just what we heard about the daily horrors of the housing struggle, but it is also, and you will hear later, about the health issues and also about the educational system. It's all linked together. All linked together. And we cannot fight this as single issue battles. We cannot win as single issue battles. They have to be united. And this is where I like to dovetail into the necessity of a people's convention. There were a number of us several years ago who tried to raise this issue of a people's convention at the point when Charles Barron was running for mayor. And we said that it's great that Charles Barron is running for mayor, but let's not reproduce this electoral campaign thing or centered around one person running for mayor and have no program for the people once that person becomes mayor. So let's build a people's convention where all of the issues get discussed and interrelated and planned out how to solve these problems. Not just have a 3-day bitching session, but have a development of a convention that maps out, just like the ruling class does, a plan of action, a 5-year plan of action, a 10-year plan of action, a 15-year plan of action, a 20-year plan of action, in all of the aspects of all of our struggles. And that we have the expertise from our communities, from our allies in the universities, to lay out these things. And so I'm proposing it again, because what happened then was Barron stepped down in the name of not having enough money from running, and therefore the People's Convention idea flopped. And it was more of a detriment to us. We have more gentrification because of that.
Including the one that Fitch made last night. And just very quickly, he talked about the role of Goldman Sachs right here in Harlem in terms of acquisition of properties. And of course, they are members of the ruling elite. It is all within the context of finance, insurance, and real estate. These are the economic engines that are driving the political and economic machinery here in New York City. So facts that were just, that would just blow your mind, and how he connected them. Now, what we're going to start off today is, I believe, an equally incredible workshop. Because remember, what we're trying to do, again, is not tell you how to fill out a form and to talk about HPD and DHCR, but really to give you an analysis of what is happening here in New York City and the broader context, and to give you that analysis in a historical context. And this is an important part of it, because this carefully researched book, praises from Alexander Coburn of Counterpunch, Deborah and Rod Wallace, A Plague on Your Houses. And it is really incredible. And all of us remember when the Bronx was burning. Well, why did that happen? And how is that related to what is happening today? What was the role of the RAND Corporation in public policy about planned shrinkage here in New York City? This is an incredible book. It's carefully researched, and we are very, very honored by the fact that Deborah and Rod Wallace, people whom I have known for a very long time, are here today to talk about their book within the context of gentrification and public policy. So I present to you Deborah and Rod Wallace.
The neighborhoods of color in the United States have undergone waves and waves of displacement. After World War II, the first wave then was urban renewal. And Mindy Fuller-Love, in her book Root Shock, reviews the national picture with respect to urban renewal. In New York City, urban renewal was an outcome of a century-long debate about slums. Property rights versus public health and welfare. Environmental influences on health versus giving you a pill. Okay. Would you please turn off your cell phones? I really can't talk when there's a lot of ringing and... That's a house phone? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm so used to cell phones that, sorry about that. Okay. Back in the days of the gangs of New York, there were real slums. I mean, these were slums like your mother didn't remember. And they were a danger to themselves and to the whole population of New York City. This was where tuberculosis, typhoid, all of those kind of things would incubate and spread out to the rest of the city. Something really had to be done about them. And there was a young doctor named John Griscom who wrote, he was the physician of the clinic down in Lower Manhattan. And he wrote the famous book, The Sanitary Conditions of the Laboring Classes of New York City. He founded the Great Reform Movement. And he did the special study on poor people's populations, which occurred after the Great Draft Riots of 1863. Okay? The notion of a slum is what took hold culturally then. When people talk about a slum, they think about those conditions. So after World War II, slum clearance became popular, and in the minds of a lot of good-hearted people, the picture of a slum was that outdated 19th century picture. By the end of World War II, the slums here were not like that. They were real communities, thriving communities, deep-rooted communities, like Harlem, the South Bronx, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brownsville. These were lively communities. Okay? Now, after World War II, a law was passed. It was the 1949 Housing Act. It had two components in it, which led to urban renewal. One of it was Title I, and the other one was Title III. And Robert Moses, who was the great urban renewalist here, used those two parts of the law to clear out communities and redevelop. Some of his projects included Lincoln Center, the UN, And Morningside Heights, I live in the Title I housing that was built in Morningside Heights. I live in Morningside Gardens. All of those areas, like Lincoln Center, Morningside Gardens, the UN, they used to be tenement housing, real communities. Title I allowed condemnation of land and the building of new private housing, subsidized by the federal government. Title III authorized the building of 810,000 public housing units. A single authority was allowed to coordinate these things. This led to an abuse in New York City because it allowed the targeting of neighborhoods of color. A disproportionate number of neighborhoods of color were condemned. Thus came the phrase, urban renewal is Negro removal. Even in integrated neighborhoods, like the West Side and Greenwich Village, the blocks that were heavily had residents of color were especially targeted. So New York City became, under urban renewal, Robert Moses' urban renewal, one of the most segregated cities in the United States. And there's a wonderful book called American Apartheid by Nancy Denton and Douglas Massey, if you want to know about the fact that New York is one of the most heavily segregated cities. But by 1961, urban renewal fell out of political favor. Even the liberals, who originally supported it because they thought it would make poor people's lives better, saw the harm that it did. These communities had been just destroyed. People were dumped into these high-rises, and the social controls that had been in effect in the old neighborhoods were lost. So, and the social support was gone. So you got the drug epidemic, you got a lot of more prostitution and violent crime because of the loss of community. So, by 1961, urban renewal could no longer be put forth in New York City. By 1964, the war on poverty began. And one of the unrecognized blessings of the war on poverty was the community organizing that occurred during it. You had the youth groups, you had the multi-service centers, the senior citizen groups. People got a lot more organized. And this was even before the civil rights movement began to look at the northern situation. You started to get black politicians being elected. So across the river, you had Kenneth Gibson in Newark. You got a black mayor in Detroit. And the white political establishment here was watching this. Herman Badillo made a credible run in 1969. He came very close to becoming a mayor. Something had to be done, and they couldn't use urban renewal. What are they going to use? What can they use to disorganize the organized communities of color? Now, before I take that on and describe to you